Welcome back to the channel. My name is Tronage, and today we're going to be talking about how you can practice flying your Tinyhawk using a simulator on your computer, and I'm going to show you how to set that up. Want to learn how? Stick around. There's one question that seems to come up often, and that is there any way to use this controller that came with the Tinyhawk bundle and use it with a simulator so that you can practice learning to fly without beating the pants off of your Tinyhawk? The second question you should be asking yourself is, if this video is all about hooking this up and using it as a simulator, why do I have goggles on my head? Simple. Why not? It's actually just for effect, so I'll take those off. The short and dirty answer to the question is yes, you can absolutely use this controller to hook up to your computer and run one of the simulators on it. But we gotta be a little bit creative because the controller or transmitter that comes in the Tinyhawk bundle is designed to be bound to a single flight controller, which is the Tinyhawk. So if you bind this controller to something else, it'll lose its bind to this because you can only have one bind at any given time. So the easier answer, if you weren't using this controller, let's say you had something like a Tronage or something, and you wanted to do what we're going to accomplish today. The real easiest way to do that is you go and you get a USB dongle that's compatible. So I got two of them here. This orange one is for when I'm using my Spectrum radio, and this black one is for when I'm using that Tronage for FreeSky. And these simple dongles, you just plug them into the computer, you put it into a binding mode, you bind it on your transmitter just like you would do any other model that you create, and off you go, you're done, finished. The issue with this controller is it doesn't have multiple models. So this transmitter is FreeSky, and in theory, you could bind this transmitter to the FreeSky dongle and off you'd go. But then you'd lose the bind to your Tinyhawk. So then you'd have to rebind these together each time. And that seems to be rather pain to have to keep binding it to the dongle, binding it to the craft, binding it to the dongle, binding it to the craft. Because I don't know about you, and if you've never had to experience the binding process because you bought this bundle and it came pre-bound, sometimes binding can be frustrating. Sometimes it won't work and you don't know why it's not working. When I do any kind of build or anything, the part about the whole thing I hate most is actually binding the transmitter. For some reason, I just feel like that's where there's always going to be some sort of problem. So if we can avoid doing that, that's a good idea. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So what we're going to do instead, we're going to use the Tinyhawk as the dongle. Believe it or not, that is possible because this has a F4 flight controller in it that's running Betaflight, and the version of Betaflight that comes on here supports this feature. It's really simple to do. It might be a little intimidating because we will be plugging this into the computer and we will be having to use Betaflight. Now, if you missed my setup video, you can check the link up there. I go through doing the whole setup of this bundle without using Betaflight, and I just show a few little things you can do in Betaflight to help tweak it a little bit further. So if you want to be able to do this, you will have to go into Betaflight. It might feel a little bit uneasy for some people, but that's perfectly normal, and we'll get through this together. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to hook it up, how to plug it in, what you got to do in order to use it, and then I'll show you how to set it up. I don't want to make this too specific to any one flight simulator because there's a whole bunch out there. So I'll talk about the ones that I like to use and which one I think is best to start out with and maybe progress through. So why don't you come on in close, I'll show you how to get this all hooked up and what we got to do. So there's a couple things you're going to need in order to accomplish this. First, obviously, you'll need your Tinyhawk. The next thing you're going to need is you're going to need a USB cable that supports data transfer. Now, unfortunately, the USB cable that the Tinyhawk came with, this does not work. This is just for charging purposes. It's missing, I guess, the pins or the wires or however, but if you try to use this cable, it will not work. You need a cable that's not just for power, but also provides data transfer. So I have a USB cable here. It's already plugged into my laptop. Got this on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description for everything that you may or may not need. So this way you have those for your reference. So what you're going to do is one end of this is already plugged into my computer, and you're going to take the other end and just plug it into your quad. Now notice there's no battery installed. We do not need a battery in here because we're not going to be spinning up the props. We're not going to be flying this actual drone. We're just going to be powering up the flight controller, and that will get the power from the USB port. So we'll plug this in and you'll see it'll sort of light up. And then you also hear that it connected to the computer. So now, as you see here, it says COM3. Now, yours may be something completely different. It may say COM5, COM whatever. It doesn't matter as long as it changed from something. So I'm going to show you what it looked like before. If I disconnect, it looks like this. Once you connect in, you'll see it changes and it connects. Now, if yours doesn't do that, that means there might be some sort of issue with your USB port. It may be there's an issue with the cable that you chose so that it may not provide data transfer over that cable. So there's several things that you can look into. Specifically, make sure you have a good quality cable, number one. You should hear it do that little like tone up thing so that at least you know something's going on. But worst case scenario, if you want to see what you can do, there's this thing called the Impulse Driver Fixer. So I'll fire that up right now just so you can see what it looks like. I'll put a link to this in the description below so you know where to download it from. And then you can see it fixed my drivers and off we go. And now if we unplug it and replug in, we have a COM port. So hopefully if you have some sort of an issue, the ImpulseRC driver fixer will work for you. If it doesn't, check your cable because it might be that your USB cable just doesn't support the data transfer. In any case, now the computer is now seeing your Tinyhawk as far as being there. So once we have it showing that it has a COM port, we're going to then hit connect. And that'll bring us to the setup screen. Now you will know that everything's working properly. If you pick up your Tinyhawk, you jiggle it around a little bit and you see the thing on the screen moving as well as you move your quad. Then you know everything's connected, everything's communicating, and everything's all set and good. Now, we're not going to go through and touch any of this stuff over here. None of it. Because this could be fresh out of the box. If you want to know about any of that kind of stuff, you can check out. I have other videos on my channel about Betaflight, about setting things up and what all the settings mean and everything. But we're going to keep this focused on just setting this up for it being a simulator. And where we're going to go to that is we're going to go down here to the CLI. CLI stands for Command Line Interface. We're just going to type in a command and tell it to do something. Okay, so all we got to do from this screen is just right down here on the bottom, you can type your command. Now, the latest version of Betaflight, I've noticed as you start to type a command, it starts to help fill it out for you, so it makes it really easy. You don't have to type the whole thing out. But if you have an older version of Betaflight, which you shouldn't because you were a good boy and girl and went and downloaded the latest version, you can just start to type something and it'll complete it, and you can just hit tab to skip to the next part of it. So what we're going to type in this command line, we're going to type in set USB, and see right after I typed USB, this little yellow part that started to pop up here, that we're going to just hit tab. But that's the command. If it doesn't pop up for you, you're going to type in USB underscore HID underscore CDC. That's the command. Now we're going to give it an equal sign. What do we want it to do? Well, it's defaulted to off, so we want to turn it on. So you can either use your arrow key to go down to on and hit tab, or just type the word on. Choice is yours. But essentially, that's the command that we need to input into this is set USB underscore HID underscore CDC equals on. And you hit enter. And now what you'll see up here is you sent it into the flight controller, and the flight controller responded back saying, okay, I've set it to on. We're not done yet though, because that doesn't mean it saved it. It's sort of like if you start typing an email and then your computer crashes in the middle and it just poof, goes away. Even though you did type it into the computer, it didn't actually save it anywhere. So that's what happens here. The flight controller has it, but it didn't like say, okay, I'm gonna save that information. And guess how we save it? You got it. You type in save, S-A-V-E, and you hit enter. It's gonna kick you out. The reason is because when you type save, it's gonna reboot your Tinyhawk, and in the process, it's gonna kick you out of Betaflight. Now at this point, we're done. Sort of. Because just like an on-off switch, now forever and ever until you change it, this Tinyhawk is now gonna act like a little USB dongle to allow you to play simulators. But if you try to fly that Tinyhawk now, it's not gonna work. So before I forget to show you later, because I'd like to show you the different ways of setting it up in the simulators, I'm just gonna show you how to turn it off when you're done. It's not that difficult, and it's pretty much exactly what we just did. So you would hook up your Tinyhawk should already be hooked up because you just finished playing your simulator. You go into connect, you're gonna go to the CLI, you're gonna go down here to the command line, and you're gonna type set USB. It'll pop up that thing again, so you can just hit tab, equals, and now we want to turn it off. So off's already highlighted, I'll just hit tab again. But there's our command line. Set USB underscore HID underscore CDC equals off. You hit enter, and then you would type save. Now, I'm not gonna hit enter, because if I do, it's gonna turn it back off, and that means if I wanna show you it in the simulator, I'm gonna have to turn it on again. So think of it like an on-off switch. Every time you wanna use it, you issue the command on, and you type save and hit enter, and it should reboot. Then go play your simulator. When you're done with your simulator and you wanna fly the Tinyhawk, you go back into Betaflight, go to your CLI, turn it off, and type save and hit enter, and it'll reboot, and now you can go fly your Tinyhawk all you want. All right, now let's talk about using this in a flight simulator. So now when it comes to simulators, there's different things that affect how good or bad or whether you like or don't like a flight simulator. There's whether you like the different tracks or maps that are on it, whether you like to race or freestyle with it, whether you like the physics of it. And what do I mean by physics? Well, just how does the quad perform in the simulator? Does it feel realistic? Does it feel floaty? Does it feel stiff? Like, you know, as a beginner, you're not going to necessarily know these things, but as you fly it, you'll say, well, when I'm flying my Tinyhawk for real, it does not feel like this. This feels much more floaty and fluffy, or this seems really different. That's what makes the physics better or worse or just different for different simulators. The other thing to keep in mind is the way a Tinyhawk would perform in a simulator versus like the Tronage budget build would perform in a simulator are going to be kind of different, because this is a little mini quad. This is like a 5-inch quad. So you have to keep that in mind too, because if the simulator doesn't have little micro quads to fly, you're not going to get that same sort of feel. Also, if you're primarily flying indoors, like in a room, and you're using a simulator that you're out in an open field, it's not going to feel the same. So that's why I like different simulators for different reasons. All right, so there's 4 simulators that I personally like. You're welcome to choose your own. We're going to really look at just one today, but they all function about the same. The 4 that I do like are the DRL Simulator, Liftoff, Velocidrone, and Rotor Rush. Those are the 4 I like, kind of for different reasons. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but some of them do physics better, some of them have better graphics, some of them are more fun versus learning and simming flying. So it's more of like an arcade game versus a simulator. So there's just those aspects to all these different ones. The one we're going to look at today, though, is going to be Rotor Rush. And the reason why we're going to be looking at Rotor Rush specifically is it has a course and a setup for tiny whoops. Now, granted, the Tinyhawk is a little bit more powerful than a tiny whoop, because a tiny whoop would be a brushed quad, and this is a brushless quad. But what I liked about it is a lot of people, when you're learning to fly this, you're going to be flying in very close proximity. You're going to be flying in your house, in your room, around the coffee table, bumping into the dog. That's the type of environment you're probably going to learn on before you start going outside with this. It's good to have a simulator that has that sort of environment with small crafts, with a tight environment, with close proximity, so that you get that same sort of feeling. Then as you start getting more outside and doing bigger and better things, then there are courses in Rotor Rush that you can do that are bigger courses, but you can also go to the other simulators as well. The choice is yours. Let's go into Rotor Rush and see how to get this all set up. So I'm going to fire up my Rotor Rush, and we're going to go into Fly Solo. Also, I just realized I do have to turn on my transmitter, because without it on, it ain't going to work. So let's turn on our transmitter. Now my transmitter is on, and now it should be able to communicate with the Tinyhawk, and the Tinyhawk is going to pass that on straight to Rotor Rush. All right, so now we're at this screen that basically says the thing we're interested in is this key C to configure controller, which means basically just push the C on your keyboard. Then you'll see here it says controller interface and says press to select Maytech F411. So we're going to click that. It tells us to center all sticks. So we'll center our throttle stick and we'll hit configure. And now it wants us to move the throttle up and then the throttle down and then turn to the right and then turn to the left. And now pitch forward, pitch back, roll right, roll left. Now the next thing I want you to be sure of, when you're doing this, both switches are in the down position, and we're going to skip this aux part. We're just going to hit save at this point. The reason is that because, remember, this controller is still telling this Tinyhawk things to do. It's trying to fly, but the flight controller is just passing that information through the USB to the computer like a dongle would. The difference here is that as you're flipping these switches, it's also changing the modes from horizon mode and level mode and stuff like that. So it's trying to like do all different things, and the simulator doesn't really know what's going on with that. So we're going to just skip that for now because it works a lot better in Rotor Rush to just do it this way. Feel free to experiment with the switches if you can get them to work. It's basically just so you can arm and disarm without having to hit the enter key on your keyboard. No big deal. So we'll exit out of here. And now our controller is now this controller. So we can push up. And you have all kinds of quads here to pick from. These little micro quads to larger quads. And if we keep going, we even get to the big Mondo quads. But we're going to stick over here with the small ones because that's what we want to feel, is a feel like the Tinyhawk, but in the simulator. So we'll stick with this micro, which is a tiny whoop. And we'll go over here to the Tiny Whoop branded courses. And even in here, they have a whole bunch of playground, office space, you know, all kinds of stuff to go check out. But we'll just stick with this first one just for demonstration purposes. And you just push up again and it loads in. And here we are. Now you want to make sure that your throttle is in the low position because there's no, safety check here. If you arm, it's just going to start taking off. But in Betaflight, remember, if you try to arm with your throttle not in the low position, it will just sit there and say, well, I'm not going to arm. So we're going to arm our motors by pushing the enter key. And now you can hear our motor spinning up. And now we can just fly. So we can give it some throttle. We can fly through this gate if we want. We can go into this other room. You can go all around. Let's check out what's going on in this room. And this gets you and the idea here is that it gets you comfortable flying in close proximity, and to try to just not crash is what a lot of you will be doing for the beginning, is just trying to not crash. And there's actually a little course here that you can do. I'm not so great at it, but I'll show you how it goes in case you want to try to learn the course. Is you start over here where you take off, and here's your course. Supposed to go around that chair leg. And then you go into this other room. And you come down here and you go through the tube of death. In real life with the tiny whoop, those tubes are so hard. If you skim the edges, you're done. It like grabs you and won't let go. Go behind the couch, and then under the coffee table, and then you go through the loop and start over and do it again. But that's basically how you... What's this on the floor here? It's like toys or something. I've never noticed that before. But the whole idea is you don't have to necessarily do this course. You can play, you know, by yourself. You don't have to be doing any kind of races. But it just gives you a feel for how to fly without doing any kind of real big time damage. And I'll tell you, I mean, granted it doesn't feel exact. I mean, this is a little bit, it's a little different. I mean, this is a little easier, I would say, to fly than the actual Tinyhawk. But for a beginner starting out, it'll really get you accustomed. Oh, that's kind of cool. You see like the little shadow of your drone on the wall there. That's kind of cool. But you just get accustomed to feeling out how you fly and what to expect and everything. And notice I'm flying in angle mode right now because that's what's set up in the game to be flying in angle mode. You can turn that on and off. If you hit escape, you can go into the hotkeys here, and it shows you toggle flight mode. Stability, STAB is really angle mode, and then you have acro mode, so you'd hit M. So if I hit M, now I'm in full acro mode, so I can do like, you know, crazy stuff here if I wanted to. You know, I crashed, so I have to hit enter to arm my motors. But see, this is where the physics feels a little weird with it, because a lot of the simulators feel a little bit too floaty, and I feel like Rotor Rush feels a little bit too heavy. Like if you boom, you're down, you know, kind of a thing. It's kind of like the I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say though. But you can just keep practicing this, and I mean, you can see I'm using my Tinyhawk as the USB dongle. I'm using my bundled controller here to control this, and I'm full on, you know, playing on this sim, doing my thing. And this is, I highly recommend anyone who has this bundle to definitely check out some of these sims, because, you know, they do help you learn how to fly. Or on a rainy day when you can't fly, it lets you do this. And the best part about it is no matter how much you crash, like I can do that. Now in real life, I'd be like, oh man, I hope I didn't break anything. You know, yeah, I'll just go take off again. You know, I could just, you know, crash into those walls. I can, you know, go crazy without fear of breaking anything or hurting anybody or anything. You know, if I want to go nuts, I can go nuts. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but hey, what's this on the couch? That's fun. It's like a little magazine. But basically, that's how you set it up. You go into your, you plug in your USB cord. You don't put a battery in it. You go into Betaflight. You go into the CLI, and you type set USB _HID _CDC equals on or off. Remember, it's a switch. Once you turn it on, it's on forever until you turn it off. So if you're saying, okay, I'm gonna go do some simming, hook it up, turn it on, type save, close Betaflight, fire up your simulator of choice, go into wherever they have their controller configurator, and just set up the Matek F411 as your controller. The switches might be a little bit finicky, so just keep that in mind. Worst case scenario, just keep them both in the down towards the floor position, and don't set up the switches on your controller, and just use whatever your simulator has for arming the motors, and you can start flying that way. You're welcome to experiment with the switches. They just seemed a little bit finicky for me, but there you go. Now you have the tools to be able to take your ready-to-fly kit from Tinyhawk, and on the days that either you don't have batteries charged, or you want to just get some extra practice in, or remember, you can also run the different maps that are like in open fields. So if you don't want to practice that close proximity, you want to say, well, I'm not really ready to go outside yet, but I'd like to see what it feels like to go outside. Well, there's the Tinywhoop Playground one. You know, because remember, the Tinywhoop has a feeling kind of like the Tinyhawk. I mean, the Tinyhawk is definitely more powerful, but it's the same concept. But if you start trying to play with like the 5-inch quads, you're going to have a completely different feel than the Tinyhawk provides. That's why I like Rotor Rush for playing with micros, because it has like micro stuff that has that same sort of feel to it versus the 5-inch sized quads. But again, I'm not telling you to check out any particular flight simulator. I'll leave that choice up to you. I just wanted to give you the tools to be able to use the Tinyhawk as one of these dongles so that you're able to use this transmitter on a simulator without having to rebind it to get one of these and rebind it to this. The beauty of this is you don't ever lose your bind. You're still bound to the Tinyhawk. You're just basically telling the Tinyhawk, fly, or pretend you're a joystick, and it'll just pass that information out. So go out there, find yourself a simulator and start practicing, because I want to see you guys flying. I want to hear about it down in the comments below. Let me know what simulators you checked out, which ones you like, whether or not you agree with the ones I like or not. I'm always looking to, you know, check out another flight simulator. So if there's one that you know about that I don't, comment down below, let me know, tell me about it, all right? So, as always, my name is Tronage, fly strong.